This is a story about a robot. Annie Bot was created to be the perfect companion and girlfriend for her human owner, Doug. She's designed to adapt and learn to get better at meeting and serving all of his needs. It's a story about what and how she learns. You follow her to her tune-up appointments with technicians, and you ride a bike with her. You feel her sentience and consciousness grow, even while you are continually reminded she's a robot and needs to plug into a charger regularly. On this episode of Desideratum, we're talking about the disarmingly provocative and edgy novel, Annie Bot, with author Sierra Greer and narrator Jennifer Jill Araya. Jennifer is an Audie Award-winning narrator with incredible range and skill that you're going to hear in the audiobook samples coming up. And author Sierra Greer has been racking up the awards for this book. Annie Bot just won the Arthur C. Clarke Award, which is an award started by and named for the author of 2001, The Space Odyssey. It's a yearly award. Annie Bot is the 39th winner. For some context, back in 1987, Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale won the Arthur C. Clarke. Annie Bot was also named a Best Book of the Year by Scientific American, Harper's Bazaar, and NPR, a Best Science Fiction and Fantasy Book of the Year by the Washington Post and Elle magazine. But you'll hear the author say this wild thing about how she was on the third draft of the story and hadn't told her family about it. She wasn't sure she would turn it in to her agent. She thought it was weird, maybe too weird. Okay, let's meet this comfort zone pushing, deep thinking, and award-winning storyteller. I want to start off and talk about with Sierra a little bit like where this story came from for you. I thought it was different than anything else I'd ever read. And that's a really rare thing, right? I think a lot of times we read something and we go, oh, this is like that. Or even when you're talking about it to someone, you draw correlations to some other work. But this was really a unique work. Can you talk about where this story came from?
So I am a pretty organic writer. I don't start with an idea or an outline and just make it go from there. I write things and just sort of see what emerges from the characters. And I had actually started with writing a short story about a different robot maid. And at the end of that short story, that maid went in for a checkup. And while she was in line, she met Annie. Then Annie provided the moral consciousness for the end of the short story. She was the one who could say, what you're doing to this other robot is wrong. And that was really a leap for me to have a robot character who was just far, far advanced from what I'd always thought of as robot characters. I was still thinking about the Jetsons or C-3PO from Star Wars. I really hadn't thought about how AI would affect AI companions or our interactions with sentient, alive kinds of robots. So I started writing the novel just to sort of see what would happen. I followed Annie home and I wondered what kind of owner would she have and how could she have developed to be as advanced as she was. And I just sort of wrote the story to find out what was going on with her and how she had come to develop. So that's how the story emerged.
Did you at that point do technical research to sort of figure out what was possible in that?
It's actually pretty important that I did not do a lot of research because I think if I had tried to ground it in what was happening with AI back in 2020, I would have missed the boat. It has advanced so quickly from that time that I would have written something that would already have seemed super dated. So instead, I knew that Google Brain had been able to translate one language to a third language by going through a second language in between them. And it had taught itself to do that without being told to do that. So I knew back in 2018 that there was a computer that was thinking for itself in a way that I had never known before. So I was aware of that in the back of my brain, but I didn't go out and think, well, what's going on with AI right now? I just made things up because I really wanted my characters and the tension to serve what was happening in my story. That was more important to me than trying to ground it in reality. And again, it's an advantage that I did that because I think I really would have messed things up. And instead, what's happening now is that I'm sort of more frightened every day by the story I wrote 4 years ago or 5 years ago because the world is catching up to what my book was suggesting.
Yes, that must be a sort of surreal experience because you just said you were just drawing from your own creative. Do you feel a little as if you were predictive in some ways?
Yeah, I feel like I was a little prescient, but I also kind of wondered when I wrote it, as you were saying, there were not a lot of other books out there at the time. I mean, there are certainly books about robot human interactions, but they are not usually from the perspective of the woman, the female
Yes.
robot. So that in itself is quite unique. Um, but I think once I wrote it, it seemed to me like a super obvious book to write. I was like, well, why aren't there these books? Of course, there should be robot human interactions that are really intimate. It just seemed like a really obvious thing to me once I had done it, but I hadn't seen it before.
Okay. I'm going to interrupt the conversation a couple times in this episode because I want you to experience some of this story, some of the robot human interactions that Sierra just described as intimate. This is a scene connected also to that origin short story idea Sierra was just describing about the robot maid in line for the tune-up or service meeting another robot, Anniebot. What Sierra imagines and how narrator Jennifer Jill Araya, who you will meet in a minute, how Jennifer inhabits the story's point of view, the robot Annie, is so good. This is from Anniebot, written by Sierra Greer, produced by Abigail Nover, published by Harper Collins Audio.
He draws her hand against his lips, sniffing her lotion. She can't smell it, but she's aware that he likes the lemony aroma. "Am I warm enough?" she asks.
"Getting there,"
He says, and shifts slightly. Taking the cue, she slips a couple fingers under his belt, in his waistband, feeling the warmth there. His hands return behind his head. He is still not in a hurry.
"Tell me more.
He says,
Did this strange Stella have a neck seam?
"Yes,
So she's a basic. Was she pretty?"
I suppose so. Pretty enough. She was a white girl with blonde hair and big brown eyes. She didn't smile much, which also seemed odd.
How was her body?
Compared to mine?
Just answer the question.
Annoyance. A 2 out of 10. She must be careful. He stirs again. She pulls out his shirt tails and undoes his buttons, working them randomly for a change. She had a classic hourglass shape, Annie says, remembering back. A couple inches taller than me, I'd say. Fit and curvy overall.
Like a model, then.
He says.
It sounds like you made a friend.
She gives a genuine laugh.
Is that so funny?
He asks.
Should we invite her over for a play date?
As she finishes his buttons, he sits up enough to get his shirt off the rest of the way. Then he settles back again. She trails her hand slowly down his bare chest and shakes her head. "I'm afraid her CIU's been cleared," she says. "They made a mistake with her."
How do you mean?
She rubs her hand down his zipper, lightly, and he stretches again. She straddles his legs and undoes his belt, taking her time. One of the techs had flipped on her autodidactic mode, but he hadn't told her owners.
I didn't think they could do that.
I don't think they're supposed to. This tech said he just did it as an experiment. She pauses, lifting up a bit to pull his pants and boxers out of the way. She was very unstable. Over half of her memory was compromised. Someone was using her as a cuddle bunny.
So? You're a cuddle bunny and you're autodidactic.
But I know that, and you know that. We chose it together, she says. This Stella was still switching back and forth between modes, and nobody was training her. It had to be incredibly confusing. She has settled onto his legs again and checks his reactions as she touches him. He sucks in air.
I don't see what the problem is,
He says.
So she was confused. She could still follow orders, couldn't she?
Annie pauses, perplexed.
Annie, that's not a good time to stop.
But she frowns, still unmoving. She's sitting over him, her open robe falling to either side. For once, she has more clothing on than he does, and she feels how it tilts the balance of power between them in a not unpleasant way. He sits up slowly, holding her on his lap, and touches her shoulders gently.
What did I say?
He asks. It's just... She stops, letting herself sound like she's searching for words while her circuits whirl. In truth, she doesn't know how to explain it. She was like a child, she says finally. He leans his mouth to her shoulder and kisses her there through her robe. Then he slides her robe gently down her arm to bare her skin, and kisses her again.
She's not a child,
He says softly.
You're giving her the same feelings you have, but she's not like you.
How do you know? She asks.
Because I do,
He says.
You're light years beyond a basic Stella. I love when you get all righteous and compassionate.
She's still feeling puzzled, distracted, vicariously lost. But that's clearly turning him on. He twists, bringing her over onto her back, and she lifts her hips to accommodate him. She wants to ask if he would ever have her CIU cleared. But she knows this is not a time for questions. It is not a time for talking at all. She has reached the right temperature now.
That was Jennifer Jill Araya reading from the novel Annie Bot. She's going to join our conversation in just a minute, but first, let's get back to author Sierra Greer. She's talking about how the book plays on what we expect relationships to be, and also about the dangers of loneliness.
There are over 20 million people every month that use AI companions for just the most popular AI companion program. And a lot of them, I think the majority of them are young. They're like between ages of 18 and 25. So this is really AI companions that you just can have on your phone or your computer. They're really common and going to become more and more common. And I think they reflect a loneliness that is here in our society. And I find it really sad and troubling that so many people are lonely, that it's easier for them to reach out to a computer companion. I understand that they would, because it is easy, and loneliness is just not worth, it's horrible. I mean, it's horrible to really feel lonely all the time.
Painful, yes.
Yeah, so I feel in some ways it really serves an important purpose, but there's a dark side to me too. I don't like the idea that someone is profiting on our loneliness, and the companies that provide these services are certainly profiting on our loneliness. And I also fear that when we practice interactions with computers, that takes time away, at least, from when we could conceivably be practicing on relationships with humans. So I think the potential danger for humans is pretty big, and I don't think right now the AI companions come with any kind of a warning like cigarettes do or alcohol. I think that there's real potential for a lot of misery to follow from what we're just sort of blithely accepting right now.
Yes. And I think not only does it take time away from human interaction, but it distorts what is human interaction. So
Yeah.
one of the things that I found fascinating about this book is how the owner of this robot is, like you said, training it. You were saying, like, how would this owner interact with it? And he's creating sort of his ideal. That's the
Oh, yeah.
point, right? And then writing it from that female perspective, how she responds to his desires, his wants, how She is seeking to please. As you have her evolve, where she questions some of that, or you see her reflect on her own thoughts, I think that's where you expose some of that. Like, this is real human action interaction, is this two-way street of compromise and dissent. And yes, so that is one of the things that I think is scary. And yet it felt like a real interaction between a man and a woman sometimes.
Well, if you're going to say that, then it almost contradicts what you just said before. Because
Yes.
actually, there are some relationships where one person essentially owns the other. And
Yes.
there are abusive relationships where people feel like they're in charge of or dominate the other, and people who feel like they have no choice except to obey what somebody says. And that's one of the problems of the book. It actually you have this entry point because you know she's a robot, and you start out thinking it's okay what happens to her because she's like the toaster. And then there becomes this point somewhere in the book where almost every reader says, well, wait a minute, she is so human. And if a man is treating a woman the way he's treating Annie, then that's not right. So
Yes.
it's a curious book because it really plays on these ideas of what we expect relationships to be.
I want to bring Jennifer into the conversation a little bit on this point, because I do think she creates from the very beginning. Um, your delivery of this is so compelling
Yeah.
and I believe and believable. Can you talk a little bit about how you approach that, or how that, or maybe how it affected you?
Sure. So,
Yeah.
answering the final part of your question first, in terms of how it affected me, I narrate typically somewhere between 70 to 100 books a year. And that's a lot of books that
Yes.
I read. And
Wow.
I also read a ton for pleasure. I'm actually tracking my own personal reading this year, and I'm already up to 24 books read this calendar year, not
That's
counting
wonderful.
my workbook. So I do a lot of reading. And some books will stick with me, but it's relatively rare that they like truly stick in a deep and sort of soul changing way. And
Yeah.
Annie Bot was one of those books for me. I think I can probably count on my two hands the number of books that I've narrated that have stuck with me in quite the way that Annie Bot has. It really deeply impacted me. And I think some of it goes a little bit with what Sierra was just saying, where at the beginning of the book, and this is me doing my prep read, I'm coming to the book completely fresh. I don't have any preconceptions necessarily. So I'm reading it before I start narrating it.
Yeah.
And at the beginning, it's like, yeah, she's a robot. It's there's questionable morals here, but she is a robot. It's fine. And then there's that very gradual, but also very shocking transition when you realize, no, this is really not okay. And in some respects, it felt a little bit like, and I don't think this was your intent necessarily, Sierra, but it felt like you used the human robot relationship dynamic to speak about the dangers of abusive and relationships and domestic violence in a way that wouldn't put people's guard up. Because at
Mhm.
first you do think it's okay. And then you realize how deeply not okay it is. And it
Yeah. Yeah.
addresses those issues in a very disarming kind of way. So, really deeply moving, incredibly powerful. After the audiobook came out, my husband actually bought it and listened to it and was sort of live telling me all of his thoughts as he was going through it, and had somewhat the same reaction that it's, yes, a book about robots and AI and humanity and where do we draw the line with sentience in these created beings, etc. But it's also a book about very human relationships and what's okay and how we treat each other.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I love the word disarming, actually, because it does sort of sneak up on you. And I wondered uh, how you felt about all of the other characters in the book, all of those other interactions, and outside of the owner and the robot.
Sure, sure. So
Yeah.
while I was recording the book, I was very conscious that I didn't want any of my personal as a reader feelings about those other characters to slip into my performance.
Mm,
Because often, especially in, first person or, limited third person perspective narrations, you do want your own personal feelings to slip in there some because that's part of the character. You know, the story is designed that you, the reader, have similar feelings about the other characters as the person whose perspective you are reading. Because Annie's a robot, that's often not the case. As a reader, we have maybe a deeper understanding of the people and other characters and other robots around her than Annie herself does. So,
Mm-hmm.
as I was working on the narration side, I was very consciously entering the booth and setting aside my feelings about the characters because I didn't want
mm,
that to be in my performance. I wanted the performance to be Annie. At the beginning, she truly doesn't understand the complexities at all. And Sierra does an incredible job of allowing that growth to happen over the process of the book. But if I had started in my performance at the very beginning, already coloring it with my understanding of what the reality of these relationships was, it would have completely destroyed the development of the story for the reader. So I guess in
wow.
answer to your question, Teresa, it was almost irrelevant what I felt personally about the other characters because that wasn't Annie's feeling, which again is very
Yes.
different from a lot of other books that I narrate.
Yes. Sierra, what did you think as you listened? I wonder how that experience was for you.
I was really, really impressed with what Jennifer did. I have to tell you, I got to pick Jennifer to be the
Oh,
narrator for this book. Yeah, my my editor sent me some potential narrators to do the job, and I listened to about five of them, and I was like, they're good. They're really good, but they're not quite Annie. Could I please have more? And so she sent me
wow.
five more possible people. And as soon as I heard Jennifer reading, and I listened to her, in clips with a bunch of different books because that's possible to do, I could hear her range there. And she just has this voice that it can just be so expressive, but it can also be sort of factual and just sort of gentle and sort of poignant. It has all the range. And I thought that's
Mm,
what this book is going to need. So I picked her. And the first time I was listening to her, the recording, I was really amazed. I was amazed because I felt like she brought the characters to life much more than they had been to me on the page. Even there's in the very first chapter, there's a moment when Doug, the owner, bumps his head on the cabinet and he says something with the F word that's just sort of, I had pictured it as just kind of this offhand, like, what this kind of thing in a very casual way. And Jennifer gave it a different kind of, she had a different interpretation of that one line that I
mm,
thought conveyed Doug's character very vividly. And
wow.
just right from the beginning, I realized, oh, she's going to do things. It's really like when an actor gets a chance to say, to be or not to be, and five different actors will say it five different ways. I realized I was really trusting Jennifer with my book in a very, very important way. And I was glad I had taken the care to pick somebody who could do it as brilliantly as Jennifer did. And I've had so many people write to me and say, "Oh, I heard it on audiobook. It was so great. She did such a great job." I mean, as if they knew we were friends and I could pass it along or something. But like, it's never just, "Oh, I loved your book." It's, "Oh, I love the narration of your book." So I think
Yes.
a lot of credit goes to Jennifer, and huge numbers of people access the book by audio. Some are reading it, but a huge number are getting it by audiobook.
Yes. And in this case, I do think, maybe in all cases, but for me, in this case in particular, the delivery was so critical because it wasn't human. Like there's also these really big ideas of what it means to be human and how the way we treat other humans is a reflection of what kind of human we are, you know? the people that were programming her or maintaining her, the people that serviced her, and how other humans were going to start thinking about her, because you know, as the reader, how she's evolving and how she's thinking. But all these people that are interacting with her from the technology side of it, um, as you wrote out that plot, how did that come to you?
It was really fascinating to me. I had I had done a lot of thinking about the situation with her tech people before the novel started because I'd written the short story. So
Mm.
I knew from the short story that there was a place where people went for tune-ups. And I realized that's what you would do. Like you have your car, you take it in for tune-ups, and you would do that for your robot as well. So I knew that that system, that world building would be there around her. And I really like novels that don't go into the extra stuff that's in the background that you don't really need to know. But I like it when a book is informed by what the outside world is. And in Annie Bot, most of the action of the novel takes place in the apartment that Doug owns, that Annie lives in with him. But it only works as this isolated, compressed, encapsulated place because you know there's an outside world out there. So you experience the outside world a couple of times, most significantly about halfway through the book when she goes on a bicycle ride with her friend Delta. Not a huge spoiler, but it's a significant ride and important things happen from that. And she also has experiences later in the book when she's learning to interact with the exterior. But the first part of the book is all inside, aside from, as you were saying, these interactions with technical people.
Yeah.
And I did think about those relationships because I knew what they said to her would also convey what the rest of society was like around her. So when a
Yes.
technician says to Annie, "You're so lucky to have Doug, he's such a good owner," or
Yeah.
if she says, "You're advancing so rapidly," or if the owner of the company calls up and says, "We'd like to, we'd like to have you involved with a profile. We'd like your Stella to be talking to in a magazine to be interviewed." Things like this gives us clues as readers that something special is going on with this robot. Not all of the robots are developing the way Annie is. So there's something about the dynamic between her and Doug and the fact that they chose for her to go autodidactic and self-learning. There's something about that that's making something special to her. So I did definitely think about that. It's important, I think, to express that as a writer, when I write a first draft, I don't know what's going on. I'm with Annie. I'm really as
Mm.
blind as she is going through the book, but that's not true once I'm revising. So just as like Jennifer changes her understanding of the book after she's read it to influence how she reads it out loud, my understanding of the book also changes what I do to develop it and make it deeper and richer as I go along the way. It was really important to me to keep the book short and tight. I just felt like it was not a book that should have excess words or paragraphs or chapters at all. And I
Oh.
have just a little story related to that. I'd written the book, it was probably the third draft or so before I sent it to my agent. I didn't tell my family what I was working on. It was outside my comfort zone. I just wrote this for myself, thinking no one's gonna want this. It's just too weird. But
Wow.
then I sent it to my agent and he's like, there's like a 48-hour gap in there around the bicycle ride time, actually. And he said, you really need to fill in those 48 hours. And I was like, no, I don't want to slow down the pace of the book. I don't need anything extra in there. And he's like, just give it a try. So I wrote
Oh.
those scenes, and of course, they turned out to be some of my favorite scenes in the book. I really, really like what happens on a bicycle ride. It's super important. But that caused the book to expand a little bit because there had to be those words in there to fill it out. So I only want to have words in there that really, 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 really matter. So I cut a lot to keep it short, but then when I was forced to expand it, then I did.
Yeah, I think that's such a great little nugget of wisdom about working outside your comfort zone also, and sometimes a project that you think like, oh, this is really weird.
It was weird. It's
You
really
know?
weird. I think like, what is my mother going to think of this book? So it's just like sex
Yeah.
robot book, really?
I would say that it's only a sex robot book at the absolute most superficial level. I mean, you go down half a millimeter, and it is about what it means to be human at the
Yeah.
most deepest, the very deepest and most basic level. So the sex robot label on top is not even skin deep. It really does have those layers. And I just wanted to sort of add a little bit to what Sierra said in terms of her world building as especially a performer reading books that I am going to be performing for the audiobook. I'm always looking for those background clues about the world around the characters that I'm giving voice to. And
Yeah.
reading and performing Annie Bot was one of the easiest times I have had in any book I've ever narrated in figuring out what the culture and the world around the characters was. It was so clear, it was so precise, it was so crystallized
Mm.
in a very beautiful way in Sierra's writing. In the narration community, a lot of times we talk about the words that we're working with as dance partners. Sometimes you're dancing the waltz and you've got someone that's just on top of every single beat and the waltz is beautiful and even. And then there are other dance partners that you have to put a little bit more work into it to figure out the rhythm that dance partner needs. And this Annie Bot, at least for me, was very much an example of my dance partner, Sierra's work, giving me everything that I needed and being so crystal clear that this is exactly the right choice for how to perform the audiobook. It was beautiful.
That is very interesting. I guess I haven't thought about this too much, but or how it would relate to narration, but when I write something, obviously the dialogue has its pattern going back and forth, but if I write something that's a paragraph and the first draft I write it, every sentence starts with subject verb, you know, and then there's no sense of starting with a prepositional phrase or something or a gerund or something to give it a flow. I'll go back to that paragraph and I'll actually like check, well, does every sentence start subject verb? And I'll just make sure I have sentence variety there. It's variety in there. It's a very sort of English teacher kind of thing to do, but it does make something sound less robotic. And then other times, like if there's a scene that needs a quick pace, that's a time when you do want to have subject verb and short sentences because it just moves things along quickly. So the language it really is this tool, this thing you can sculpt or carve to try to get pace and fluidity. And there are times when you can sort of back off and become a little more poetic to give it some kind of a resonance. So it was fun to be able to do that.
Okay, another interruption. I really loved this use of metaphor, language as a sculpting tool, and narration as a dance with the written word. So let's listen to another snippet of the audiobook. This is a scene that both Jennifer and Sierra wanted to share with you. And when I requested it from the producer Abby at HarperCollins, she remembered the audiobook and this scene fondly as well. It's a scene about memory from Annie Bot.
In late August, after arranging for a neighbor to tend to Paunch, they take a weekend trip to Cape Cod to walk on the beaches and eat fresh oysters. In September, they hike Franconia Ridge, celebrate Doug's 35th birthday with cupcakes at the top of Mount Lafayette, and spend a night at the Greenleaf Hut. It's fun to be away in the wilderness, but it's nice to come home, too. And Annie newly appreciates the comforts of their warm apartment and all the benefits of the city. Then comes a day in October when Doug sends her out with no errand to run and no destination.
Just explore,
He tells her, handing her $20.
have fun,
When should I be back?
whenever you like.
He says.
I'll be here if you need me. You have your phone?
She nods.
Then go.
He says, smiling.
Let's see how you wander.
Her nerves start as soon as she steps out of the apartment. It's a test, obviously. She needs to figure out how to please him when he's given her no hints at all. Outside, she turns instinctively toward the park, since that's most often the way they go. But without Paunch, she has no conspicuous purpose there. She could go to the library, the grocery store. She mentally catalogs everywhere she has run an errand before she realizes her mistake. She needs to go somewhere new. He wants to be surprised by her choices, by her story when she returns. Heading south, she passes a museum and countless businesses. She turns on her infrared vision to identify several handies and Stellas, but then turns it off again. She double-checks that her temperature is up to 98.6 so she'll fit in with the humans, and pauses with a small crowd to observe a mime. She slows her breathing, looks up at the sky, and absorbs the city sounds around her. A whiff of smoke draws her gaze to a cart where a short white man is roasting chestnuts. And beyond that, she sees the shop window of a fabric store. It's a narrow, quiet place, and as she enters, she finds only one other person is present, a small white woman who is seated at a sewing machine to one side. Light from the machine illuminates her fingers and a swatch of white fabric. She does not look up or offer assistance, and Annie accepts this as permission to browse. Around her, bolts of colorful fabric are arranged on shelves and in bins. Chintz, satin, velvet, cotton. The sewing machine starts and stops in sporadic hums as Annie ambles slowly along the aisles, eyeing ribbons of different widths, braided cords, fasteners, buttons, gleaming needles, and chains. The organization is efficient but also whimsical, and Annie ends up before a section of gauze and silk pastels. A mannequin wears a wedding dress, and Annie is irresistibly drawn to rub the soft fabric between her fingers. She and Fiona used to come to such a place when they were girls. She remembers it, the colors and textures. Turning to see a display of laces, she catches a glimpse of herself in a full-length mirror and pauses. She and Fiona would drape the lace around their faces and soberly study their reflections. She pictures this so clearly that for a moment she can actually see what she looked like as a child. Her cheeks are gently curved, her lips are tender, and her eyes are intent, innocent. It's a haunting, mesmerizing face in the glass, and Annie waits, half expecting the illusion to speak to her. Across the shop, the front door opens and street noise drifts inside with a customer, breaking the spell. Annie is startled to find her eyes are damp, and she wipes away at them. As the new customer talks to the woman at the machine, Annie slips out and returns to the reality of October. She won't tell Doug about the fabric store. Her missing childhood is too raw, too precious. She buys him some chocolates and heads toward the East River. She'll take a walk on Roosevelt Island. That's what she can tell him. It isn't particularly imaginative, so he may be disappointed, but it's the best she can do. It was a very moving and powerful scene. I'll still occasionally be in a specific place and kind of have that scene come to mind, and the movie view that I created for myself as part of performing it come to my head. And I sort of see the set that I would envision being around Annie in those moments. It was a very powerful part of the book that stuck with me deeply.
I have to say, I've been surprised by how moved people are. I did wonder if anyone would want to read this book at all. It's because to me, it just was so strange and so unlike anything I had read before. And people have really appreciated it. And I hear from readers still, like the book's been out over a year now. The paperback came out a couple of months ago. And people are really receptive to it and very moved by it. And I hear from women who feel like they've been in abusive relationships and they feel like this book has given them a voice. I've heard from therapists that have said they feel like this really describes situations that they've tried to help people with. I've heard from men that have said, I recognize myself in Doug, and it's been really painful for me to revisit who I used to be, but I recognize some of the same phrasing from what I have said in relationships, and I've been trying to grow. And I've heard from people saying, I've given this to all my friends, and people, I mean, they'll like stop me to say, this really mattered to me. This really touched me. And they're often surprised because I think they come to it thinking, like Jennifer was saying, oh, it's a sex doll book. It's a sex girlfriend book. And that is basically, that's a tagline you would put to advertise it because, I mean, you're not going to say it's about a circus, it is about a relationship. But yeah, people have been really moved by it. And I feel very honored.
Yeah.
I think how moved people are speaks a little bit to what I was mentioning earlier, that because there is sort of that superficial veneer,
Mhm.
people allow the story to enter their hearts a little bit less cautiously than perhaps you would have if you'd labeled it a book about domestic violence. If it had that tagline, there would be instant walls put up, and there
Mhm.
are certain people who just would choose not to read it because of those walls. And because it has the veneer of being a human robot relationship, it allows the story to worm its way into your psyche in a really beautiful and powerful way that
Yeah,
it could have otherwise.
I think that's what happened. I couldn't have written the book about two humans. It would not have been the same book at all. And I've also had readers not really pick up on the abuse element of it either. They just appreciate the book for just this curious relationship between a human and a robot. They like it that way too.
One of the things that I found really compelling was the character of Doug is lonely, and as a reader how lonely he is. Also, really cruel,
Mhm.
break your heart sort of cruelties, and that fleshed out his character in a really powerful way to me. Did you research domestic violence? Did you tap into sort of all of the layers of that to write a character like that?
I've certainly known people who've been in abusive relationships. I think all of us know somebody who's been in abusive relationships. So I didn't have to go out looking for research for that.
Mm.
I just have known people. So um, I was also just really interested in the dynamic of what could happen when any one person could be completely in charge of somebody else. I think that has to just be soul shattering for the person who's owned, obviously. And it has to be soul shattering for the person who has complete control too, because there's no barrier to the possible cruelty. And I think it would corrupt somebody, especially if he's already a person who feels entitled by society to be in charge. The curious thing to me about Doug is that he really is ashamed of owning Annie at the beginning. He's lonely. He wants her. He pays a lot of money for her. He enjoys her, but he's also ashamed, which is why he keeps her secret for
Yeah.
years, really, before his best friend discovers that she's there in the apartment with him. And I think that Doug stands for a lot of men in our society who have been encouraged to believe that they're entitled to be in charge, that they should get good jobs, they should be able to have money, they should be able to control people who are lesser than them in our society. So I think he's symbolic, really, of a
Yeah.
system that set him up. I think he's rare. I don't think all men are like Doug, but I don't think he's impossible for us to believe. I think there are enough people like Doug in the world, and I think our society has created them. And I don't think it's fair to write them off and say that they're all monsters either. I think that they have chances to grow and to start seeing people with just a little broader, more gentle gaze. So I hoped my book left that open to. I didn't want the book to completely condemn the Doug
Yeah.
character. People can read it however they want, but for myself, I didn't want to set him up as only villainous.
No, I don't think you did. And I think it was even what you just said a minute ago about how you've heard from some readers that his phrasing, the way he thinks about things and the way he articulates himself is recognizable. And I think you do a fair job of showing him striving to redeem himself in some ways or striving to become better. They both are on a journey of evolving as in their humanness. right?
Yeah, right. In some ways, it's almost like a Beauty and the Beast story, right? It's certainly the Pygmalion story, the My Fair Lady kind of a story,
Yeah.
where someone is training this person to be perfect and then she outgrows him. So there are hints about My Fair Lady. There's a time when they're walking in the park and they hear the streets where you live, which is a song from My Fair Lady. So I dropped that in there. I think the book might be on the bookshelf. It was sort of fun to drop in these other allusions. Jennifer, you're smiling.
Yeah, so I
Yeah.
caught the one about the song, but if Pygmalion's on the bookshelf, I missed that one.
It
So
might not be. I might have put that on a reading list because my publisher asked me to create a reading list of the books that are referred to or that are related to the novel. So I think I might have just put it on that, but yeah.
Yeah. What did you think, Jennifer, about the references to how part of her growth is very tied to reading?
Oh, it was beautiful. I mean, I already mentioned, I'm a huge reader. I
Yeah.
read voraciously. I have my entire life. And books are transformative and I think can make us better human beings. And that's actually the role that they play for Annie in a very real sense. So
Yes.
I loved the way that she transformed through the works that she read. Yeah.
It was significant. Is there anything that I haven't asked or that hasn't come up in conversation that you think is really important to say about the book, Jennifer?
The one thing that I guess I would maybe add is about the power of memory. So in social psychology, there's this idea of the stories that we tell ourselves around our own memories and helping us phrase and understand and comprehend things that happen to us, things that happen around us. And Annie, as a robot, doesn't have traditional growing up memories. So the way that a human would take our memories of our growing up years and tell stories around those memories, Annie develops stories of herself kind of out of nowhere, and not always out of nowhere because there are companions around her that sort of help her form some of those. But as I was both reading the book ahead of recording it and then also performing the book and doing the acting of recording, the scenes that relate to memory felt to me like some of the most powerful, speaking to the power of story in general,
Mhm.
the stories that we use to comprehend ourselves, to understand our role in relation to others, and the power of those stories to shape the way we perceive the world. And I think Annie learns a lot about other people and herself as she is developing memories for herself.
There were times when there was the conflict between what could remember. She could remember things verbatim, exactly how they were remembered. And Doug has a more squishy memory, like our human memories, where things are not quite so clear. I mean, sometimes if something really upsets him, he remembers exactly what was said. But other times he's like, oh yeah, I don't know. And then she knows exactly what was said months earlier. So she remembers it in different ways. It was interesting for me, Jennifer, to put things together and that in there's a moment, I don't think it's a spoiler to say late in the book that she goes into a fabric store and that's tied to her memory of her childhood, but she didn't have a childhood, as you said, so she has to sort of fabricate that. But there are hints earlier on in the book that she had a past because she has these two telephone companions, a cousin and a best friend, that are supposedly people that she had known her whole life. Well, they're AI too, and she just accesses them by the phone, and you know, they're sort of extreme, ridiculous characters, but they're important to her and they connect with her and identify with her and they give her an opportunity to talk about her feelings in a way that she can't always with Doug. So she's really important as a vehicle for me as an author to be able to explain things about how she's thinking and feeling that I couldn't just like write down on the page because she wouldn't just say this to the
Mm.
reader. She couldn't do that. But there were hints earlier on that she had visited a fabric store with her, I think it was her cousin. And so when I was thinking later in the book where she could go, the fabric store was, and I had lots of other ideas that were not the fabric store, but a fabric store is so tactile. And
Yeah.
it's really a beautiful thing to have tactile stuff like that show up in a book, I think. So I did that. But yeah, I had to imagine her whole life growing up in a town, and where was it going to be? Was it going to be Rhode Island? Was it going to be Galena, Illinois? And I had to do research on Galena, and is there a like a college nearby that she could have gone to? I mean, it had all these things that I also had to imagine, and sometimes I can't even remember precisely which ones ended up in the book.
Oh, that's fascinating that you have a deeper story about her still.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And some people have asked me if I'm interested in writing a sequel, and I've tried to see what would happen with Annie going forward. I tried just seeing what happens with her, like one scene later after the book, and to see if that would go forward. And then I tried jumping ahead in time 5 years. I tried writing it from the perspective of one of the different characters.
Yeah.
And none of them really had the right resonance for me to be able to follow along. And I know rough drafts are bad and it's maybe too soon to give up, but I really feel like I ended the book at exactly the right place. It's both an ending and a beginning. So to me, it's where
Yeah.
it had to end. And I'm fine leaving her there. Just leave her there.
I think I hadn't really made that connection, but those are my favorite kinds of books where the ending is an ending and a beginning, where me as a reader can also continue to envision what happens next. With all of them, with Doug, with her. Yeah. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing as an author to give that to your readers, a story that has an ending and a beginning. I love that. Okay, so the name of the podcast is Desideratum, which is a reference for me to a poem called Desiderata. It's full of life lessons. The Latin word itself means things that are desired as essential, or the desire for essential things. So my goal in talking to storytellers is always to dig around in the essential things under the story, around the storytellers. And this book is rich, rich, rich with essential things. But I want to end with that as kind of my last question for both of you. And we can start with Sierra. What do you think for you? And you could answer it as a storyteller or with the perspective of this book, or just any way you'd like. What is essential for you?
Well, I think about that. Um, our time is so precious, and our world is so precious and in trouble. And it can be overwhelming to think about the problems of the world and feel helpless to do anything about that. And then I realized actually trying to have connections with real people in real time is something we can do, especially when you think about the loneliness that is reflected at the heart of Annie Bot. So my goals for myself are to spend time with my family and to write. Those are my two real focuses. And around that, there's this chance to also have friendships. And that's a really short list of things: family, writing, and friendships. But
Yeah.
those are the essentials for me. They're kind of selfish, but they give meaning to my life. And there's a chance that with my writing, sometimes I reach other people who are not already friends and family too. So I guess those are my essential things. Was that the kind of answer you're looking for?
I Yes, that's exactly what I'm looking for. I think you are clearly a very deep thinker about things. And I'm really grateful that you're putting that into, to use Jennifer's words, crystalline words, that you are distilling those deep thoughts into things that you can convey to others in story. That's a profound gift you have. So yes, that is what I was thinking. Thank you so much. And I love that
Thank
answer.
you.
What do you think, Jennifer? How do you add to that?
I truthfully don't know how you add to that, but
Right?
so my two driving values as both an artist and also in my personal life are sharing and serving. So sharing of myself, of my talents, of my gifts, and of my humanness and my soul with others around me, with my colleagues within the acting and audiobook industries and just sharing of myself, giving of myself, and then serving. In a lot of what I do, that's serving the text and the characters within it, but it's also serving the listeners and serving the colleagues that I'm working with. If I'm able to share and serve in a particular project, then it's a project I want to be part of. If I don't envision a place for me to share and serve, then maybe that's a project that's better suited for someone else. And in my personal life, that controls and dictates in a very positive way the kinds of commitments that I take on and how I approach my friendships and family and relationships and so forth, is sharing and serving and graciously encouraging others to share and serve too.
That's awesome. And it's so funny you just said that about that drives your decision making about what to do, because it ties back to what Sierra said about the first thing you said was time is our most precious resource, that you use your essential things to help you determine how to best use your time is a really great nugget of wisdom for people. I really like that. I really like that.
You didn't answer your own question for us.
Yeah, please share.
Oh my gosh. Do you know, Sierra, in the years I've been doing this, no one has ever turned the question on me.
Well, then you must be ready.
I think your podcast listeners deserve to know.
Wow. Okay. So I think I'll go into my head into Desiderata, actually, because this is the reason that it resonates so much with me, this poem. And the beginning line of it is, go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. That's the opening of the poem. And I think right now I feel like there is so much noise and haste. And approaching that with peacefulness and calm is really essential to me right now. And then connecting with people, which ties back to what you're saying about making sure that I continue to use whatever small spotlight I have, whatever voice I do have, to try to connect so that we are not feeling alone.
I want to say thank you again, Teresa. It's been such a pleasure talking to both you and Jennifer. I really value a thoughtful conversation, and I appreciate being invited in the first place. So thank you, and thanks for all you do.
And likewise, thank you, Teresa, for asking us. Thank you, Sierra, for being willing to be part of this conversation. I knew when Teresa reached out that I wanted your voice as part of the discussion as well. Narrating Annie Bot was truly a meaningful, powerful privilege, and I love your writing and am just so lucky that I got to be part of it. So thank you, Sierra, for that, and thanks, Teresa, for giving us an opportunity to chat about it.
I hope you enjoyed getting to know author Sierra Greer and narrator Jennifer Jill Araya as much as I did. And I hope that these snippets of the audiobook entice you to want to hear the rest of the story. I'm going to put an affiliate link to libro.fm on my website and in my show notes, and you can get the link from me through social media if you reach out to me there. When you purchase your audiobooks from libro.fm, you can pick a local to you bookstore to support with every purchase. If you would like to hear more books by Jennifer, you can find her website is her name, jenniferjillaraya.com. Her last name is Araya. As she mentioned, she serves the narrator community in a couple different ways. She is a creative entrepreneurship coach. She co-hosts the Crafting Audiobooks podcast, and she runs an in-person event called Thriving Narrators Retreat in Ohio. You can find out all about that at the website Starving Artist No More. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for listening.